Tithíocht, we go now to Deputy Catherine Connolly.
Cean Corla, Tithíocht. Tá maidir isteach chachar nGaillimh agus conda nGaillimh agus an Géarcim Tithíocht atá an in anón gur buniú task force 2019. In anón sin ní léon túrascáil críochnúil agan fós ó híomh analíse de agus tá an Géarcim Tithíochta a gairí a bhhad níos measa. I náíre chuirdann sé an spot solas, an spot tholas follasí an réaltas agus tá tepi agah go hillis go thomláin ó híomh cuasaí Tithíochta a láthair. Taoiseach, I'm going back to Galway City and County in relation to the housing crisis because it's a microcosm of what's happening in the country, and it actually brings into acute focus the utter failure of your housing policy year after year and government after government. In 2019, a task force was set up in Galway City and County, 2019, prior to COVID, prior to the war in the Ukraine, because there was a crisis, and because Galway City Council and the county had utterly failed to build one single public house from 2009 onwards in Galway City, directly related to government policy. And I say this today in the context of our former city manager telling us in February of this year, 5 years after the task force, that Galway City Council will not be able to meet its social housing needs. I say this in light of the European Commission telling us the shortage of social housing have created long waiting lists, have resulted in over-reliance on short-term supplement solutions, and have contributed to a steep increase in homeless. 12,691 homeless. 12,691, a 752.41% increase since 2012. 279 of them are in Galway City and County. I raise this because, foolishly, I put a little faith in the task force that was set up, which has simply become another layer of the establishment, another layer of administration that has proceeded for 5 years to get more and more presentations. Today I got the report for 2022 today, for the last year, in 10 months later. And it proceeds to tell me that Galway City built very few houses, but even the ones that did build are at odds with the figures from the Department of Housing. So I'll go by the Department of Housing. And the Department of Housing tells us that in 22, at the end of 22, we had built 26 houses in total, direct build in Galway City. In the county, we had built in total 150. Now, there are other figures given in the report from the task force, which brings again into acute focus the messing around with figures, the complete obfuscation in relation to figures. And when we talk about the provision of social housing, we're including just about everything under that umbrella, from long-term leasing to other arrangements. Now, what I'm asking you today, Taoiseach, is to take a hands-on approach in relation to Galway City and County. The housing crisis is worse than Dublin, and we have pockets of land with no overall master plan. All of the segments, Kent Station, the docks, Dyke Road, Sandy Road, all working separately and not without a plan for the common good.
Thanks. Thanks very much, Deputy. I'm afraid I don't have those figures available to me at the moment, so it's impossible for me to comment on them. And I know you've raised the issue of the Housing Task Force for Galway City and County before. I think when we calculate how much social housing is being provided, we need to recognise that there are many different ways in which social housing can be built and can be provided. And I don't mean hap and ras, I mean social housing, where somebody has a long-term tenancy and has security of a roof over their head. Sometimes it's houses and apartments built directly by local authorities. Other times it's through approved housing bodies. That's particularly the case in my constituency. Sometimes they're purchased on the market. Sometimes they're leased long-term. Increasingly now they're being constructed by the Land Development Agency. And as somebody who's had the privilege of attending the opening of many of these developments and seeing people getting their keys and moving into these homes, they're not particularly concerned about what mechanism is used. What they want to know is that they're getting a house with a long-term lease that gives them security and a roof over their head. So I think we should always bear that in mind. We today, at Cabinet, approved the publication of the new Planning and Development Bill, a bill that I recommend to the House. We believe that will help a lot. A huge number of housing developments get held up in the planning system, then get held up in the courts, and we believe this comprehensive reform of our planning legislation will mean more developments getting through planning quicker, whether it's social housing or private housing, and that can help to alleviate the housing crisis. And when it comes to social housing in the round, last year, more social housing provided than any year since the 1970s, and we anticipate an even higher figure again this year. We won't know that figure until sometime next year, but we anticipate an even higher figure again this year, which is welcome. And again, some very encouraging signs on home ownership. About 700 individuals and couples getting mortgage approval for their first home now every week, the highest we've seen since the Celtic Tiger period, and maybe 400 or 500 individuals and couples purchasing their first home every week, and that's really good to see. I wish we'd seen it sooner, but it is really good to see that happening now.
Thank you, Tithíocht. Deputy Connolly.
Tithíocht, on a daily basis, I remind myself of the salary I'm earning and the privilege it is to stand here. But it's increasingly difficult to listen to the narrative from yourself and the government. Please, let language mean something. I return to that theme over and over. There's no difficulty with these figures. This is the Department of Housing telling us 26 houses direct built by the City Council in 1 year, and the other figure for the County Council. There are no HAP properties available in Galway City. That was the only game in town in my time as a councillor, and remains so. Absolutely not one single house available within the HAP rates or the discretionary rates. There's a capacity problem at county level and city council level because repeated governments have failed to resource. They have no capacity. I've quoted the former city manager telling you he won't meet the targets. Well, let's stop the double speak and the gobbledygook about housing and realise that the government must, through the local authorities, build housing, public housing, on public land. Let's look at Galway City as an example of what can be done with the master plan for the common good. Down the docklands where we have acres, do you know what we're going to do there, Tithíocht? We're going to build premium housing, not public housing, because that's not good for the dockland area. That's not good for your ethos. Thank you.
Thanks, Deputy. What we're doing and what you recommend that we do, we're doing all over the country. We're building public housing on public land, we're building public housing on private land, and we're buying private housing to use as public housing. We're doing all of those things. Just in the past 10 years, look at the census figures. The percentage of people who live in social housing, who benefit from social housing, has gone up, not down. About 40,000 more families live in social housing now than was the case 10 years ago. And last year was a record year in terms of the provision of new social housing, and we're determined to make sure that this year is again.